The sound was the first thing to break. Not a sound, really, but the absence of it. A sudden vacuum before the thunder. On the trading floors of the stock exchange, silence was the purest signal of panic. Seconds before, the hum of 1,000 parallel conversations, the frantic clicking of keyboards, the incessant ringing of phones. Now, a heavy, dense silence, like the air before a storm. The monitors, once a sea of hopeful green, bled red, a vivid, aggressive red, blinking in unison, like a visual fire alarm. In the eye of the chaos atop his tower of glass and steel, Arthur Smirnoff Harris was paralyzed. His eyes, usually sparkling with the arrogance of a man who moves the world with a phone call, were dull, fixed on the digital abyss, swallowing his fortune. Billions, vanishing in minutes. His assistants ran, shouted into their headsets, but their voices seemed distant, submerged. Arthur could only hear the ringing in his own ears. And, amidst the pandemonium, across the trading floor, he saw Jonas Lee, the intern, the odd kid. Jonas wasn't running. He wasn't shouting. He was standing looking at the same catastrophic screen, and on his face there was no panic. There was confirmation, a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if he'd been waiting for this, as if the chaos was merely the logical conclusion to an equation only he had seen. How? How did that kid know? Where are you watching this story from? Leave a quick comment down below. I love knowing how far these words reach. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the unfolding of stories like this one, which show that the greatest strengths often reside where no one bothers to look. To Maya Garcia, her son Jonas Lee's world had always been made of a different music, a symphony only he could hear. When he was little, while other children ran and screamed on the playground, Jonas would crouch for hours, watching ants march in a perfect line, or tracing the cracks in the asphalt with his finger as if they were rivers on a secret map. He didn't speak much, but his eyes spoke for him. They were intense, focused, capable of seeing the hidden structure of things. Maya learned to understand his language. A finger tapping rhythmically on the table wasn't nervousness. It was the rhythm of a drip he'd heard 3 rooms away. Lining up all the toy cars by color and size wasn't an obsessive game. It was his way of bringing order to a world that, for him, was too loud and chaotic. She remembered, with painful clarity, the first meeting with the preschool teacher, Hannah Olson. The room smelled of chalk and disinfectant. Hannah, with a condescending smile, pointed to a row of perfectly aligned paint pots on Jonas's shelf. "He's methodical," she said, as if the word were a diagnosis. "He doesn't interact. He stays in his corner with the blocks. He stacks them, knocks them down, and stacks them again. Always the same pattern. Red, blue, yellow. Red, blue, yellow. We need to encourage him to break this routine to be more social." Maya felt a pang in her chest. Break the routine? For Jonas, routine was a safe harbor. The pattern was his anchor. Breaking it was like asking someone to breathe underwater. "He's happy," Maya replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "He's not bothering anyone." Hannah Olson sighed, the sound of someone who had already given up. "Happiness isn't everything, Mrs. Garcia. He needs to be prepared for the real world." The real world became an invisible monster that haunted Jonas's childhood. It was a world where people said one thing but meant another, where the supermarket lights buzzed at an unbearable frequency and clothing labels scratched his skin like barbed wire. Maya tried to build a bridge between Jonas's world and the real world. She bought tagless clothes, used softer light bulbs at home, explained the metaphors and ironies he heard and didn't understand. She was his translator, his advocate, his island of calm. But outside their front door, the battle was constant. Birthday parties were a sensory minefield. The sound of balloons popping was like a gunshot to him. The crowd of screaming children was an avalanche of noise. He would retreat to a corner, watching the patterns of light the party globe cast on the wall, until Maya found him and took him home, her heart aching with the pain of his isolation. His father, Louis do Barbosa, loved him, but didn't understand him in the same way. Louis was a practical man of direct solutions. "He just needs a push," he'd tell Maya at night after Jonas was asleep. "If he plays soccer, makes friends, he'll open up. He's hiding in these patterns of his." Maya tried to explain that it wasn't a choice, not a hiding place. It was his nature. It was how his neurons were wired. The discussions were gentle but filled with an underlying sadness. Louis saw a problem to be fixed. Maya saw a child to be understood. She remembered one afternoon when she found him in the garden lying, on the grass looking at the clouds. "What are you doing, my love?" she asked. Jonas pointed to the sky. "They're repeating. That cloud there, it has the same shape as that other one, only smaller. It's a fractal, like broccoli." Maya looked and saw nothing but clouds. But for Jonas, the sky was a math book, and he was reading every page with fascination. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that her son's mind wasn't limited. It was extraordinary. The problem wasn't him. It was the world insisting on measuring a fish's intelligence by its ability to climb trees. That silent outburst, shared only with the fractal clouds, strengthened her resolve. She would no longer try to fit him in. She would help the world make space for him. The following years were a succession of trial and error, a labyrinth of false hopes. Each new therapist, each new pedagogical approach, was presented as the definitive solution. Maya and Jonas embarked with cautious optimism, only to be met with the same wall of misunderstanding. There was the therapy that focused on extinguishing repetitive behaviors. The therapist, a man named Sergei Ferrari, with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes, insisted that Jonas be stopped from lining up his books or drawing his geometric patterns. "Every time he does it, redirect him to a social activity," he instructed. The result was catastrophic. Deprived of his only tool for self-regulation, Jonas became anxious, irritable. Sensory meltdowns, once rare, became frequent. One afternoon, Maya found him in his room, trembling after a day at therapy, being constantly redirected. He had torn his fingernails trying to peel off the tag of a new shirt the therapist had forced him to wear. That night, Maya called Sergei Ferrari and canceled all future sessions. The false hope dissolved into guilt and rage. Then came the inclusive school. The principal in his first meeting spoke at length about diversity and acceptance. He showed off the resources, the support rooms, the trained teachers. It seemed like a dream, but reality was different. In practice, inclusion meant putting Jonas in a noisy classroom and expecting him to adapt. The teachers, overwhelmed, didn't have time to understand his specific needs. One day, the art teacher, Amelia Bernard, reprimanded him in front of the class. Jonas was painting a series of small dots, creating a complex, hypnotic pattern on his canvas. "Jonas, the theme is my family," she said impatiently. "Stop making these little dots and draw people." Jonas couldn't explain that the dots were his family. Each color and position represented a person, their connections, their emotions, in a language that made sense to him. Humiliated and confused, he simply stopped painting. At home, Maya found the blank canvas in the trash. The school, which was supposed to be a place of discovery, had become a source of anxiety. He felt like a programming error in a system that only ran one piece of software. The social pressure was relentless. Well-meaning relatives offered advice that sounded like accusations. "You spoil him too much, Maya. He needs to learn to deal with frustration." In my day, none of this existed, and everyone managed. Every comment was a small stab. They didn't see the nights she stayed up, researching sensory processing. They didn't see the hours she spent preparing the environment so Jonas could simply exist in peace. They didn't see the sparkle in his eyes when he finally managed to explain the math behind a seashell. They only saw what he wasn't: social, boisterous, normal. Jonas's childhood friend, Luca Meyer, was one of the few exceptions. Luca seemed to understand instinctively. He didn't force Jonas to talk. They spent hours together in silence, one building intricate Lego patterns, the other drawing beside him. Their friendship was an island of acceptance, but it was only an island. The rest of the world was an ocean of expectations. The worst part of the false hope was what it did to Jonas himself. He started to believe there was something wrong with him. He tried to make eye contact, even though visual contact was physically painful. He tried to join group conversations, even though the sounds merged into white noise and incomprehensibility. Each attempt was a Herculean effort, and each failure, a confirmation of his inadequacy. Maya saw the effort, saw the exhaustion on his face at the end of the day. This wasn't the way. Forcing him to be someone he wasn't was extinguishing the unique light he possessed. The dream of a normal life for her son, she realized, was a trap, a mirage leading them further from true happiness. The turning point came not with a bang, but with the sharp chill of the corporate world. After graduating with honors in mathematics, an achievement that was a testament to his resilience, Jonas landed an internship at Arthur Smirnoff Harris's prestigious investment firm. The program was billed as neurodiversity-focused, a public relations initiative that looked good on paper. The reality, however, was a nightmare of gray carpeting, buzzing fluorescent lights, and the oppressive scent of coffee and ambition. Jonas was assigned a task considered beneath him, verifying raw data from low-level transactions, a job most ambitious analysts avoided. For Jonas, though, it was paradise. Numbers, spreadsheets, millions of data points that to others were just noise. To him, they were notes in a vast musical score. He didn't just see numbers. He saw rhythms, sequences, harmonies, and most importantly, dissonances. A week later, he found one. A tiny anomaly, almost invisible in a set of commodity trading data. A pattern that repeated every 72 hours, but with a micro-variation that grew exponentially. It was subtle, like a single out-of-tune string in an orchestra. Alone, insignificant. But if the trend continued, the dissonance would become a cacophony that would bring down the entire melody. He spent 2 sleepless days tracing the origin of the pattern, cross-referencing it with other datasets. His conclusion was alarming. It was the harbinger of systemic instability in a sector Arthur's firm considered its safest bet. He had to warn someone. His direct supervisor, Olivia Janssen Lefebvre, a perpetually hurried woman, barely glanced at the charts he prepared. "Jonas, our AI system checks all of this. If there was a problem, it would have flagged it. Focus on your work, please." But Jonas couldn't let it go. The logic of the pattern was irrefutable. His chance, or what he thought was his chance, came during an all-hands meeting. Arthur Smirnoff Harris was on stage, charismatic and imposing, talking about future vision and disruption. At the end, he opened the floor for questions. Driven by an urgency that overrode his social anxiety, Jonas stood up, his voice a little shaky. He tried to explain what he had found. He didn't use market jargon. He spoke of broken symmetry in the data, of logarithmic recurrence. People in the audience exchanged confused glances. Arthur smiled, a smile that held no warmth. He walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at Jonas. "Broken symmetry? Son, we don't sell mirrors here, we make money." Laughter echoed through the room. Arthur leaned into the microphone, his tone now openly mocking. "I appreciate the passion, but perhaps we should leave pattern analysis to our supercomputers, and you can go back to lining up paper clips on your desk. I'm sure they'll be perfectly organized." The humiliation was public and complete. The laughter enveloped him, sharp as shattered glass. Jonas sat down, his face burning. He didn't feel anger. He felt a chilling clarity. They couldn't see. They didn't want to see. The dilemma was clear. He could retreat, accept the humiliation, and let the dissonance grow until the music stopped. Or he could prove that the music was about to stop whether anyone else was listening or not. The humiliation silenced him, but it didn't stop him. In fact, it liberated him. Jonas no longer needed to try and explain himself. He no longer needed to translate the complex language of patterns for a deaf audience. He was free to simply follow the logic to its inevitable conclusion. That night, in his small apartment, the outside world disappeared. There was only him, his computer, and the growing cacophony in the data. He worked with a feverish intensity, fueled not by revenge, but by an almost physical need to solve the puzzle. The pattern he had detected wasn't just a flaw, it was a symptom of something much larger, a structural fragility everyone was ignoring. He knew he needed more processing power, access to data he didn't have. There was only one person who might understand, who had never treated him as if he were defective. He wrote an email to his former university professor, Benjamin Garnier, a quiet, brilliant man who taught chaos theory. Garnier had always been fascinated by Jonas's mind, seeing in it not disorder, but a different form of order. The reply came in less than an hour. "Come to my lab tomorrow. Bring everything you have. The next day, in the familiar quiet environment of the university campus, Jonas laid out his findings. He didn't need to simplify. He used the exact terms, the pure mathematical concepts. Garnier listened, his eyes fixed on Jonas's complex charts, asking pointed, incisive questions. There was no condescension, only the respect of one intellect for another. By the end of Jonas's presentation, Garnier leaned back in his chair, a glint of admiration and concern in his eyes. "Jonas," he said, his voice grave, "this isn't an anomaly, it's a map. And you're absolutely right, it leads to a precipice." That validation was the quiet turning point. It was the moment Arthur Smirnoff Harris's voice, and the voices of everyone else who had diminished him throughout his life, finally became irrelevant noise. Garnier gave Jonas unrestricted access to the university servers. For the first time, Jonas had the tools he needed. Days bled into nights. Maya brought him food, which he barely touched, lost in his world of code and projections. He wasn't just observing the pattern anymore. He was dissecting it, modeling its future behavior. The algorithm he built was elegant, almost poetic in its brutal logic. It predicted not just if the market would crash, but when and how. The model pointed to a confluence of events in 3 weeks, a specific trigger that would initiate a cascading sell-off, a domino effect that would decimate the sector Arthur's company had bet everything on. The clarity of the prediction was unnerving. He didn't feel triumph. He felt the weight of certainty. The turning point wasn't a shout of victory, but the profound silence of someone seeing the storm gathering on the horizon, while everyone else admired the blue sky. He had found his voice, and it didn't need sound. It was made of data. With the blueprint of disaster in hand, Jonas felt a responsibility. His intent was never destruction, but truth. He needed to warn them, but he knew no one would listen. So, he shifted tactics. He created an anonymous email address and sent a concise summary of his findings, devoid of emotion, just data and projections, to a single person at Arthur's firm, Chloe Nicolau. He had observed her in meetings. She was young, sharp, and unlike the others. She listened. She would frown when something didn't make sense. She was his one small bet. Chloe received the email and, predictably, her first reaction was skepticism. It seemed like an elaborate conspiracy theory, but something about the precision of the data unsettled her. The analysis was unlike anything she had ever seen. Out of curiosity, she decided to verify one of the smaller, more obscure data points the email mentioned. To her surprise, the anomaly was there, exactly as described. It was a small win, a grain of sand that began to shake her certainty. Meanwhile, Jonas focused on another front. His parents, Maya and Louis, had a modest retirement nest egg, invested in conservative mutual funds. Using his model, Jonas saw that even these funds would be hit by the shockwave of the collapse. He sat them down on a Sunday evening. This time, he didn't try to explain the complex math. He used a metaphor they would understand. "Imagine the economy as a building," he said. "Everyone's looking at the beautiful windows on the top floor. But I looked at the foundation, and I found a crack. A small crack that's growing. I don't know when the building will fall, but I know the foundations are compromised. We need to get out of the building." For the first time, his father, Louis, didn't question him. He saw the unwavering conviction in his son's eyes. The next day, they followed Jonas's advice and moved their savings into low-risk government bonds. Protecting his family was the most important victory of all. The days ticked by. Chloe Nicolau, increasingly uneasy, continued to investigate on her own. In her spare time, every piece she verified fit the puzzle of the anonymous email. She began to feel a chill. The firm's model, Arthur's multi-billion-dollar AI, said everything was perfect, but the raw data told a different story. Risking her career, she made a bold decision. She couldn't liquidate the firm's positions, but she could protect her own small investment portfolio and that of a few smaller clients who trusted her. Discreetly, she hedged, betting against the sector everyone considered unshakable. It was an act of faith in a digital ghost, an anonymous analyst who saw what no one else did. Every day the market climbed, she felt like a fool. But the logic in the data she'd received was so solid, she held her positions. Jonas's last small victory came days before the collapse. His model predicted a small dip in a specific stock, an event all analysts attributed to irrelevant news. But Jonas knew it was the first pebble rolling before the avalanche. For him, it was the final signal. The equation was complete. In this period of waiting, a profound transformation occurred within Jonas. The anxiety that had accompanied him his entire life began to dissipate, replaced by a deep calm. He had stopped fighting the current. He had accepted that his brain worked differently, and for the first time, he saw it not as a deficiency, but as an advantage. The neurotypical world, with its focus on social hierarchies and indirect communication, was blind to the pure, honest language of numbers. They were too busy talking to truly hear what the data was screaming. Maya watched the change in her son with silent awe. The boy who once flinched at the sound of a ringing phone now moved with serene purpose. He began to cook, following recipes with mathematical precision, finding comfort in the order and predictability of the process. He returned to drawing his patterns, no longer as a defense mechanism, but as a form of expression, a celebration of his own mind. One evening, as they looked at the starry sky from the balcony, Maya finally asked, "Are you sure, son?" Jonas didn't take his eyes off the stars. "The stars don't lie, Mom. They follow rules. Gravity, light, it's all a system. The economy is too. People think it's about emotion, about greed and fear. But beneath it all, there's math. And the math is saying the system is unbalanced. A correction is inevitable." His voice was calm, without a hint of arrogance or desire for revenge. It was the voice of a scientist declaring a law of nature. Maya understood in that moment. True acceptance wasn't about the world accepting Jonas. It was about Jonas accepting himself. He no longer needed anyone's approval, because he trusted his own perception of reality. He had found his strength not by trying to be like others, but by fully embracing his uniqueness. The humiliation he suffered at the hands of Arthur Smirnoff Harris, which could have destroyed him, instead forged him. It freed him from the need to please. He was no longer trying to fit into their world. He was operating in his, a world of logic, patterns, and undeniable truths. The deepest reflection for Maya was realizing that for years, she had prayed for her son to see the world as everyone else did. Now, she was grateful that he didn't. His unique vision wasn't the problem. It was the solution. And then, the day arrived. The day the math became reality. The trigger Jonas's model had predicted, an unexpectedly weak profit report from a key company, was released. At first, it was a small ripple, but Jonas's algorithm had predicted how automated trading systems would react, creating a negative feedback loop. The sell-off began, slow at first, then gaining terrifying momentum. Arthur Smirnoff Harris's building, with its beautiful windows, began to tremble on its cracked foundations. We're back to the opening scene. The silence of panic, the screens bleeding red, Arthur's fortune evaporating. Amidst the chaos, Arthur finally remembered. The odd kid, the intern, the words he had mocked echoed in his mind. Broken symmetry. In that moment of ruin, he understood. The kid wasn't talking about mirrors. He was talking about the truth. On the other side of the city, Chloe Nicolau stared at her screen with a mixture of terror and awe, while everyone around her lost. Everything, her protected positions not only survived but thrived. She had saved her clients and herself, and she knew exactly who to thank. She connected the dots. The humiliated intern, the pattern analysis, the anonymous email. It wasn't a coincidence. Jonas wasn't at home celebrating. He was with his parents, having tea in the kitchen. The news on the TV showed images of the panic on Wall Street. Louis looked at his son, his eyes filled with a new kind of respect. "You knew, didn't you?" "You knew all along." Jonas simply shrugged. The pattern was clear. There was no elation in his victory, only the quiet satisfaction of having read the map correctly. The sting of humiliation hadn't completely faded, but it had been overcome by something far more powerful, the proof that he was right. The hope came not in the form of revenge, but in the form of a phone call 2 weeks later. It was Professor Benjamin Garnier. "Jonas," he said, his voice excited, "I've had a call from a quantum investment fund. They don't care about elevator pitches or social networking. They care about one thing, the truth in the data. They heard about an anonymous analyst who predicted the crash. I told them about you. They want to meet you. Jonas was silent for a moment. A place where he wouldn't have to translate himself. A place where his mind would be the primary tool, not an obstacle to be overcome. Okay, he said, his voice firm. I'll go. He was no longer walking out of a burning building. He was walking into a new one, built on a foundation he understood perfectly. The pure, unshakable logic of patterns. The world is built on patterns. Some are visible to everyone, like the sunrise and sunset. Others are invisible, hidden beneath the noise of our daily lives. True genius, perhaps, isn't about creating something new, but simply having the ability to see what's already there. If this story touched you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes the most important voice is the one the world refuses to hear. Someone might need to be reminded of that today.